Retired four-star General David Rodrigues served for more than 40 years in the United States Army. During his final assignment, he served as the third commander of United States Africa Command, headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany. U.S. Africa Command is one of 6 unified geographic combatant commands within the Department of Defense, unified command structure, responsible for U.S. military operations, including fighting regional conflicts and maintaining military relations with 53 African nations. General Rodrigues has commanded at every level and garnered many awards. Among his awards and decorations are the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Defense Superior Service Medal, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star Medal, numerous foreign awards, Combat Infantryman Badge, Expert Infantry Badge, and one that I'm not envious of, the Master Parachute Badge, and Air Assault Badge. He has so many awards that he lists, off to the left when he walks with all those things down there. The General will give his view of the United States military readiness and the threats from China, Russia, and the Middle East. The title of his talk is the United States Ready for War? Ladies and gentlemen, four-star General David Rodrigues. Thank you.
Thank you. Uh-oh. I'm not sure this is at the right level yet, but it'll go to shot. Well, first of all, I'd like to say hello to a couple special guests here. First, we got Tom Hill back there in the back on the right side here, or your left, and who is a retired U.S. Army general who had a major impact on a lot of people. And I told him earlier today, we still teach one of his sayings in all the military schools for senior executives, and that is to limit what because you get busy as a senior executive. And he coined the phrase, working with another young man one time, that only do the things that only you can do. I can tell you it doesn't work at the house, but otherwise it's a very good thing. And then I have a boss of mine from 30 years ago is here, so Chili Chilcott, and we had a lot of great times in Korea together, and good to see you. But thank you all for the opportunity to talk with you today. I applaud your efforts to discuss relevant topics that are important for our nation. And I'd like to thank Paul, Anthony, and the board for providing this opportunity, as well as the Piper family for their hospitality during these couple days that we're spending here. And then I'm supposed to start off with a joke, and I'm not a very funny guy, but I just, as a military person, we look at things in operational terms. So I look at this as this is a two-part operation. I'm speaking and you're listening. If you finish before me, stand up and tell me. Okay, so we're going to talk about national security threats now and in the future. First, I want to take a look at what the current situation is in the world, because it's hard sometimes to think about what that is. But there are 4 active wars where there are more than 10,000 casualties per year. 4. From the largest to the smallest, of course, the largest one being Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the second one being Israel's war with Hamas. That I'm also including the Hezbollah missile attacks in northern Israel, and the Houthi attacks in the shipping in the Red Sea, and also now attacks from Yemen. And then the last 2 are civil wars in Myanmar and in Sudan, which we hardly hear too much about. And I have visited both Ukraine and Israel during the current conflicts. Israel once and Ukraine about 3 times. And throughout the world, 16 other countries have experienced between 1,000 and 10,000 casualties last year too. 16. These wars with less casualties include terrorist insurgencies, civil wars, border conflicts, ethnic violence, and drug and gang wars. Obviously, we're talking about Mexico there, but over 1,000 people dying every year from violence. Well, now we'll take a little trip around the world and think about how we're executing our strategy and what's important to us and what we're worried about. We'll start off with the pacing threat of China. China has laid out a long-range plan to change the international system. That's what their objectives are. The system that we currently have, of course, was laid out after World War II to maintain stability in the world, which has been very, very successful to date when you think about that. Between the Bretton Woods Agreement, between the UN Charter, all the World Bank, all those efforts were laid out after World War II to provide stability to the world. And it, like I said, been very successful. Now, China's rise over the past several years, led by their incredible economic growth, has fueled and enabled the dreams of a Chinese leadership of the world. And that's what they want to do. The Belt and Road Initiative is its flagship effort, but there is much more. Diplomatically, they're working hard to strengthen their allies and partners, to counter, of course, our strong network of allies and partners, which they have a long, long way to go. And we used to say with many of our opponents that they didn't have too many friends. But one of the problems we're having now is they are each friends. So all four of the countries I'm going to talk about here are having much more cooperation and coordination than they ever have. They've expanded their reach and integrated economic power across the globe. In the information arena, they've expanded their capabilities tremendously and are investing significant resources to stay at the cutting edge of the developing technologies. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and robotics. Militarily, China is modernizing and expanding in every facet of military capabilities: nuclear, space, cyber, electronic, and conventional forces. The anti-access aerial denial capabilities continue improving, and their coercive activities to destabilize the region are very threatening to the entire Indo-Pacific region. Economically, they're experts at what we call debt trap diplomacy. Most of you would think of loan sharks. Using economic influence to coerce desired behavior and expand their network of trading partners, which increases their influence tremendously. The impact that's had on everything from the World Bank, the World Health Organization, the United Nations votes, you can see how coercive their influence has become over the years. Fortunately for us, the picture's not totally rosy for China because they have some internal challenges with demographics. Their economy is shrinking in economic growth and a rapidly aging population. And their Belt and Road Initiative has had less than their predicted and expected success because it's awful risky to be building huge infrastructure projects in some underdeveloped parts of the world. Next, we think about Russia. And they continue to focus on internal and external security, reimposing its sphere of influence, the former sphere of influence in the world, and prosperity, and in that order, which is a little different than what most people think. In the diplomatic space, they've increased their ties with China, Iran, North Korea, and have depended on all of them for the support of the war in Ukraine. That's driven a lot of the cooperation that's going on, but it's much deeper than it ever has been. Their outreach has led to some diplomatic success in the Middle East and the global South, and they've also spread their influence deep into West Africa and set several nations backwards from the progress they've been making. In the information space, besides the interference in the US elections, they've used effective influence strategy to destabilize parts of Ukraine, Syria, and West Africa. The Wagner Group, now renamed and reorganized a little bit, is now called the Africa Corps in Africa, have helped destabilize several regimes in West Africa. Militarily, Russia maintains a formidable array of military capabilities despite some significant losses in the Ukraine. As you've known and read in the paper, they've threatened nuclear war in the Ukraine and have significant missile, cyber, space, chemical, biological weapons, and undersea warfare capabilities. Fortunately, they're challenged economically by an aging population, lack of diversity in their economy, and over-reliance on oil. And the current wartime economy has shifted in Russia to focus on war production. The population, though, continues to sacrifice for their country as they tighten their belts to support the war in Ukraine. Speaking about the war in Ukraine, the Russians initially enjoyed some success, and obviously everybody was worried those first couple days, but their attack bogged down, and the Ukrainians, bolstered by ammunition and equipment from Western nations, fought back and reclaimed significant territory that they had lost to the Russians. After the failed Ukrainian counteroffensive last year, the struggle has turned into an attrition warfare type fight. And it's pretty interesting with all the incredible technology that's out there on the battlefield. At the end of the day, it looks like World War I out there on the Eastern Front with trench warfare and people faced off with mines and mortars and direct fire and direct fighting. Their air defense against air, missiles, and drones, as well as long-range strike capabilities, plenty of ammunition, and manpower is what they need the most. And of course, they need to keep pace with the most advanced technology. Russia has turned to the Chinese for technology for guidance systems, Iran for missiles and drones and ammunition, and North Korea for ammunition and some other equipment. And again, those are the cooperation that's going on that's a little bit worrisome as they line up together. Like I said, I've been there a couple of times, and I wanted to talk to you about some of the observations I've had. First, we as a nation don't do great in the information arena and propaganda and things like that, because after the Cold War, we shut down the U.S. Information Agency. So we really don't have as strong a capabilities we used to. But during the run-up to the war in Ukraine, we did a really good job sharing intelligence and information, and it really helped NATO build a coalition. It helped the European nations. Of course, it helped the Ukrainian nation be prepared for the attack, but it was really actually very, very well done to keep everybody on side and understand what was going on, even though it was hard for people to believe that they were actually going to attack. The second thing that was incredible was the will of the Ukrainian people to fight. We keep, in our military and in our national security structure, we keep telling them it's a whole of government approach. And I think we need to really expand that to say a whole of nation approach, because that's what the Ukrainians are doing. So on the weekends, when the kids are home from school, they're building drones. It's everybody, it's all in, because they're fighting for their lives. The Western support that was so important were the Javelins, the HIMARS, which are long-range missiles, and Patriots in air defense. But we were able to get a lot of help from European nations and those outside Europe to help. And then a really important contribution we made was the intelligence sharing that helped them do a lot of the targeting in the initial stages. Some of the lessons learned was, one is the industrial base. We have a hard time producing that many missiles and that many guided things that have to go to a lot of people. And we provide most of them to our allies and to the war. Now, we're getting better at that, and our allies are starting to build them, but our industrial base is not really capable of providing as much or as fast as we need them. And those systems, as you can imagine, are pretty technologically advanced. Drones, the use of drones, like I said, has increased incredibly, and they've used them every which way you could think of to help them target better, to provide intelligence and information, and everybody is using them. I mean, they're like, it's like a kite, you know, they're all over the place. And of course, the counter drone technology is catching up, and they're going back and forth, you know, you just figured out who can quicker shoot them, prepare them, or get them flying. So it's really interesting. And like I said, they're right at the cutting edge of technology in that. One of those things that has stopped them from flying, of course, was electronic warfare. And it's been a while since we engaged in a huge electronic warfare battle, but it's going on in the parts of Ukraine and Russia right now as intense as it ever has. And then, of course, the use of space and cyber, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But really, it's incredible what's going on over there. And then at the end of the day, it comes down to a bunch of young men and women fighting in close combat after all that gets stripped away. North Korea continues to develop and expand its missile technology and its nuclear capabilities. Missile launches designed to threaten the regional stability have actually increased over time. And about 4 or 5 years ago, it was in the news all the time, every day. But now, because of all the other things in the news, it's relatively, hidden in the back pages now. But they've actually increased their number of missile launches. Iran has improved its diplomatic outreach to, again, the same troubling crew, Russia, China, and North Korea, and will do anything to weaken U.S. alliances in the region. And of course, their stated goal to destroy Israel. And of course, their influence in the Middle East goes far and wide, and they're behind just about every bad thing that can occur in the Middle East. They continue their preparations to build a nuclear weapon. They've improved their missile, drone, and long-range fire capabilities, and their oil exports keep the economy moving sufficiently to be able to fuel their wartime and their disruptive activities. They support terrorist groups and proxies. Their support to terrorist groups and proxies is the most destabilizing force in the troubled Middle East. Iran supports Russia with drones, loitering munitions, long-range ballistic missiles. They also support Hezbollah. And when you think about, obviously, the Hamas missiles, and that's in the news most, Hezbollah has about 10 times as many missiles and offensive capability as they do in Gaza. And I'm going to talk to you about how much they've shot in Gaza just on 7 October, and you'll understand the impact of that day. They also support, obviously, Hamas in Gaza, this Assad regime in Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, Islamic Jihad, and the militias in Iraq. So everywhere you have trouble in the Middle East, Iran's hand is in it. They provide annually over $100 million in arms and ammunition and equipment to their proxies every year. Now I'll talk a little bit about the Israeli war in Gaza. October 7th was a devastating day for Israel. Hamas conducted a surprise attack and killed over 1,000 people and captured 251 Israelis and foreigners. The attack was, according to Hamas, in response to continued occupation, blockade of Gaza, expansion of the settlements, and alleged threats to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as well as to gain release of Palestinian prisoners and the general plight of Palestinians. Israel responded with an attack into Gaza to destroy Hamas and free the hostages. It also, in addition to those two aims, is trying to demilitarize the Gaza Strip. And the real problem, which continues to plague everybody, is how are they going to govern Gaza in the future, which is really the holdup now, getting a ceasefire. There have been attacks from Hezbollah in the north, from Lebanon, from Iran, that emanated from Iran, Syria, and Lebanon, and recently the attack from Yemen. The Israeli attack has caused a humanitarian crisis in Gaza and reported 39,000 casualties. Now, I'll tell you, when they say 39,000 casualties, first, that's the figure that Gaza gives the news, and second, when they say they're civilians, Hamas is a civilian because they don't get dressed in uniforms. So they estimate somewhere between 35 to 40% of that are Hamas fighters. The war continues today, and a ceasefire agreement continues to be elusive. I'll give you some observations from there, and I've been down in the tunnels. Went down to the kibbutzes that were attacked, and I've been there a couple times over the years. First of all, the attack that Hamas initiated there early on the morning of the 7th was 3,000 missiles and rockets got fired. 3,000. And remember, this is significantly less than Lebanon and Hezbollah in the north. And then as they went into the kibbutzes to kill and capture all the people there, it has been a shock to the people of Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces, of course, have defended Israel for so long. They got a huge amount of confidence in them, and it really shook them to their core. It shook the Israeli Defense Forces up. It shook the people up. And they're, in addition to along south, because again, that's in the news that Gaza's in a fight and everything, all the people have left that area. The same happened in the north. There are 100,000 Israelis that live in the north along the Lebanese border that came back because they lost confidence that the Israeli Defense Forces could protect them. So it's going to take them years to recover. And that's not including the years it's going to take for Gaza to recover and get rebuilt and become something. But they went into the north, the Israeli Defense Forces, after that attack, and it's hard to describe, but when you think of 1 million people living in a city, it's complex urban terrain. So there's tunnels underneath. So the fire's coming from every direction. Below, above, and around. And nobody in the Israeli Defense Forces really understood fighting in a city of that size with that population, and with the attacks coming from the underground. There's over 300 miles of tunnels underground in Gaza, 300 miles. And that's a guesstimate based on what they know now. So this is a long way from trying to get to the bottom of what really is down underneath there. Of course, you could see from the news, it's underneath the hospitals, the tunnels. They're underneath schools. They are underneath their production facilities. They build weapons. We say Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's really a terrorist army. It's organized. It's not just a bunch of guys running around. They're organized in battalions and brigades, just like a regular army. And they have battle positions and responsibilities. So it's not just, we think of terror as a bunch of guys go out and blow stuff up. This is a terrorist army that uses incredibly tough terrorist tactics to defeat. But if you look at, and we don't, nobody condones civilian casualties and everything. But if you look at the civilian casualties, there were more at the very beginning when they went into their very complex terrain with people shooting at them from underneath, above, and around. And then when you look at it's hard to describe, but you look at a big front of a building, and there's 150 windows across the front of it, and there's fighting positions all along from the roof to the and Hamas can go in between the buildings and in through them to do it. So this is a very, very complex fight. They also learned a lot about fighting in tunnels because they hadn't done that to that kind of extent before, and most of the Israeli Defense Forces said they were not fully prepared to do that or trained to do that. Of course, Khan Yunis, which is not much smaller, was the next one, and they had a lot of challenges there, and then working in the Rafah piece, which is obviously they have adjusted their tactics over time and doing much better, but they still continue to have challenges trying to demilitarize and find obviously the Hamas leadership as well as all the Hamas tunnels. But the Israelis believe that they had an over-reliance on intelligence, technology. They believed the Iron Dome would be able to stop everything. And if you know what an anti-missile shield is, you can overcome them with 3,000 missiles. It's a lot more expensive to build a air defense piece of equipment than it is to build a missile. So it's a very, very expensive proposition. But the challenge is really, as I mentioned earlier, the future of Gaza. You know, who's going to rule Gaza? You know, the Israelis want no Hamas, no Palestinian Authority because it's had problems, and it, you know, is part of the problem too. And no Israel, you know, going to run Gaza. So who is? And that continues to be the sticking point for the elusive peace tunnel. So that's my thoughts about Israel. And again, I can answer any questions you got on that. Lastly, I'll cover violent extremist organizations, because that's the fifth problem that we have in our national security arena. They still threaten many countries, but fortunately not us as much as they used to. The two most prominent are still Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. The bad news is that they've grown somewhat in Africa because of the fragility of the governments and the lack of, you know, professional security forces and law enforcement. But the good news is in the Middle East, they've been degraded to a level where what's needed most is continuing to monitor to ensure that they don't regenerate quickly. But there are refugee camps that could create lots of problems, because a lot of fighters are still in there and their families, and they're huge. When they say camp, we think of a camp that's maybe, you know, the size of out front here. These camps are miles and miles across, that they're just basically contained in there. So it's not as simple sometimes as we think. Of course, we also have to be acutely aware all the time of the nuclear capabilities of China, who continues to grow its nuclear arsenal. Russia, who is, you know, not going to continue to stand by the treaty here that we built when back in the days. And then North Korea, who continues to increase its number of nuclear weapons. And then, of course, we have, while they don't threaten us, India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons, and their neighbors, but they have continuing problems on that border. So we got to continue to watch that, because the strategic attacks, if that was used, that would change a lot of things in the security arena across the world. Now we've covered the 4 countries and the violent extremist organizations that we worry about most when it comes to security. Now we'll examine a couple of other areas that might impact the security environment in the future. First, I want you to just think about some of the experiences that we've had in the recent past that are relative to national security, and we could see it again in the future. First of all, COVID and the supply chain challenges. Anybody forget where we were racing to get toilet paper in the stores? But just think about what that did, plus the supply chain issues that came up were incredible. I mean, we couldn't get anything from the bottles to put, the bottles to put the medicine in or anything else, because of we just couldn't get them all. I mean, we had problems with masks and everything, hazmat material. So that was a big learning lesson. Then we had the Colonial Pipeline shutdown. Remember that got shut down? Yes. We had a reconnaissance balloon fly all the way across the United States. Just a couple weeks ago, we had a global computer outage, Microsoft and CrowdStrike, and a couple mistakes on a keyboard. Of course, the dependence of Ukraine's war efforts on Starlink. Remember that? A commercial U.S. company, and then, of course, the Russian shoot-down of a Soviet satellite a couple years ago. China, the U.S., and India have also conducted similar operations in space. The Russian use of mis- and disinformation to disrupt the elections, and Iran launching an attack of approximately 170 drones to include loitering munitions, over 30 cruise missiles, and more than 120 ballistic missiles all in one day, focused at Israel. Fortunately, 99% of them were shot down, but we were very fortunate. And as I think about all those activities, I can only imagine if they were occurring simultaneously. That'd be a bad time. So that's what I want us to think about as we think about the future. And there are more examples like that. I also forgot to mention we're at the beginning of one of the biggest transformations of technology the world has ever seen. And we think about the impact of iPhones. And now, with artificial intelligence, robotics, and quantum computing, our world's going to change 5, 10 times what has changed in the last 20 years. We've probably got a few people here that had, what do we call them, party lines with the telephones where your neighbor was on the party line, right? What's that stuff called with the paper? Litmus paper? They make copies? Man. I just think where we are now and think we're going to be, in 20 years. We're not even going to recognize what it is with all this additional piece. So the U.S. military has stated that the character of war is changing, and that's a microcosm of the changing world. And it's changing faster every day. And with the increased impact of space, cyber, long-range missiles, the U.S. homeland is no longer a sanctuary. The Colonial Pipeline was actually a criminal group that shut that down. Just think about that. I think about space. I think about GPS. And let's see. Yeah, Chile, it was right before I came to work for you. It was during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And we were still using maps and a compass. But they had given us the global positioning system. They gave us about 15 of them. Remember that, Tom? They just came down to the battalions. They gave us 15 of them. So, I was an operations officer, and the battalion commander said, hey, take us back to the division operations center. And I said, okay. I looked at the map. I'm like, it's like 40 miles away across desert. And I'm like, man, there's no terrain association, no nothing. So I could read a map pretty good. Of course, when they say a hill and it's 2 feet, that's a little different. So, and in the Humvees, there was so much metal that the compass didn't work all the time, So I'm stopping every couple miles and getting out and reorienting myself with a compass. And then I'd take off again. And every time we stopped, my boss said, are you lost? I'm like, no, I'm not lost. I'm not lost. It's a long way. It's kind of like the kids, in the back. When do we get there, When are we going to be there? So anyhow, I stopped a couple times, about 5 or 6 times, and we got there, I was very thankful that I got there because it wasn't nearly as easy as I thought it was going to be. But as I came out of the meeting, this young soldier walked up to me. He said, sir, you really did a good job getting here. I said, thank you. I said, how do you know that? He goes, well, I've been tracking you on my GPS. I didn't know what it was. I said, so he showed me this box and everything. I said, I don't know what it is, but get in the back of this vehicle. You're staying with me. So I kept him there the rest of the time. His nickname was Specialist GPS. But anyhow, just think of the change and where we're at now. And it's going to be worse in 20 years, and we're not even going to understand it. So I'm going to talk to you about the 5 other things that could have a huge impact on us that we don't think about as much because, again, we focus on those countries. 1 is space. 2 is cyber. 3 is pandemics or man-made or biological problems like we had. Natural or man-made disasters and technological disruptions. First up, space. Many of the things we depend on in our daily lives are linked to space. It's getting crowded up there, though. And their private companies launch satellites often and with some cutting-edge technologies and capabilities. We can find on the internet now better pictures than we had during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Anybody can do it. I can do it with my phone in 30 seconds. It's unbelievable how much you can find out. And if you think about attacks in space against critical infrastructure, use of commercial satellites for war, and the public-private partnerships that we have to make work, it's going to be a real challenge as we look out there. I was in the Badlands 2 years ago, and we were doing a astrology class in the evening, and so I got through most of them, and while you're looking up there, about 20 shooting stars came across in a perfect line. I'm like, man. Of course, the guy was having fun with us. He said, "Look at that! I've never seen that many shooting stars at once." And then they went across the thing, and then they go into the darkness, and you're gone. He says, "You don't have to wait too long; they'll be back around." It's Starlink. Man, different world. In a similar vein, the cyber domain. There are many players in the cyber domain, and the best at it are many criminal networks, unfortunately. Mostly commercial, but the price of entry is relatively low. It does not take a lot of money to get in a challenging cyber situation. So all of our competitors, our allies, and friends participate in this arena. Hackers can also impact not only the colonial pipeline. In Ukraine, young people put together what they called a hacker army in the beginning, and to fight against the Russians. Not an official organization, self-directed, self-controlled, and just think about how that can impact in the future. Pandemics and biological warfare, we learned a tremendous amount during COVID and the far-reaching impacts they can have. And the supply chain challenges that we learned, all still out there, plus the manufacturing limitations, and it's a problem with our industrial base, building the missiles. And if we expand that to the criticality of rare earth minerals that we mostly do not get from inside the country, you can imagine the challenges we could face. Natural disasters or man-made disasters, the impact. Look at the impact of tsunamis, the nuclear plants in Fukushima or Chernobyl, or right now the potential at Zaporizhia in the Ukraine that's controlled by the Russians. And it's also because we build them on the side of water, it's not the most geological built on rock. It's moving. The effects of rising sea levels and temperatures also have a problem. Lastly, the potential for technological disruptions that are hard to predict or hard even to imagine. The speed of change is so fast, and the need to adapt faster than our adversaries are there. On that eastern front in Ukraine, they're trying to figure out electronic warfare, drones, everything, and they're going back and forth with algorithms trying to get better than the enemy, changing by the minute out there. So that's going to be a continued challenge. So as I finish up here, I've covered the 5 threats our strategy is focused on and a few other areas that have the potential impact national security in the future. I've tried to summarize the potential threats to national security, and now I'll give you an opportunity to discuss your thoughts and ask me questions. Thank you.
Okay. If you have questions, line up over here. Go around. Don't cross in front of the camera if you can. I just heard, General, that not only are the Israelis being bombarded by all the Middle East things, but Erdogan of Turkey has also essentially allied himself with that. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, Turkey is, has been for a long time, a challenging situation because it's a part of NATO, and we depend on them for lots of things in NATO. Of course, they're also the largest Islamic country that we're the closest to. We've also, of course, had the challenge in Syria, and which has led to challenges with Turkey because of the PKK, which is their terrorist network that has disrupted, and it's the Kurdish enclaves that are in Iran, Iraq, and Turkey and Syria, and it's a continuing ethnic problem that will be there forever. So Turkey finds itself in a critical location, a critical position, and having to work with every side you could imagine to try to balance out its issues. But we're hopeful that we can continue to work with them in the context of NATO, and that we can influence and hope that their behavior stays within the limits. But it's a tough situation, and it doesn't matter. It's right on the boundary of one of our combatant commands, and it's a tough challenge, and it's going to continue to be that way.
I'm just wondering if you could talk more about Gaza. If you look at the map, it's like a section of what would logically be Israel has been cut out. And then none of the surrounding Arab countries seem to want any of the refugees from Gaza. And as I understand it, Hamas is completely integrated into the population. So I'm thinking, and maybe this is naive, but why does Israel have to feel obligated to restore any kind of government in Gaza?
The Israelis aren't obligated to do that. But somebody has to do it, and none of the potential ones are the ones that people believe can do it, have much of a chance of doing it very well. So when you think about an ungoverned space that has actually been governed by Hamas, who was elected to guide them, everybody is trying to find a way, or find some people, or find an organization that can govern it, that the world can, accept, and the Israelis can accept. So it's, you would think it would be the responsibility of the Palestinian people, but right now there's nobody stepping up, and there's inability to govern it, and it can't be left this ungoverned space. So it's not the Israelis' responsibility, but the Israelis do want to accept whoever they do put in there, and however that works. That's why they can't get a ceasefire. It's the third point in the ceasefire, and nobody can find an acceptable solution.
With all due respect, sir, you left out the Navy.
The Navy is, I didn't mean to do that, because let me tell you, I'm in the Army, but it doesn't make any difference. This is all services. The Navy has been doing the lion's share of work in the Red Sea and defeating the missiles, as well as participated significantly in the attack from Iran into Israel. So this is there's no single service can do any of this alone. So all of them have to work together. But the Navy's pulling a huge load right now. And again, we think, well, they're out there out in the sea. They're fighting every day in the Red Sea. I mean, they're getting fired at every single day. And we're like, well, it's kind of quiet and calm here, So I'm sorry if you thought I dissed you.
It's just an opportunity was hard to pass up. So I read that we have 11 carriers. One of them is in a long-term overhaul, which takes 3 or 4 years. The other one is permanently assigned to Japan. So we're down to 9. 3 of those are in short-term repair and maintenance cycle.
Yes.
That leaves 6.
Yep.
The Eisenhower was deployed in the Arabian Sea for over almost a year.
Right.
And the rotation is a year at a time. And we just don't have enough. Congress needs to give us, some of those carriers are old. They only last 50 years.
Point well taken. Yeah. There's somebody in the audience whose son wrote something called The New Rules of War. And in it, he essentially said that building aircraft carriers, like we've been doing, is noble, but not as effective as CrowdStrike, who does one line of bad things and shuts down half the world. Can you speak to a transition, if there's one, that can happen with that?
Well, there is, and you can look at what has happened in the Black Sea as an example. And it's also an example of technological advancement and the speed with which it's doing. But the Ukrainians, in just a little over a year, developed, with a bunch of help from a lot of different partners and allies, 7 different undersea attack, unmanned, unscrewed, vehicles. And they have destroyed part of the Russian Navy and kept them at bay, and actually opened up the ability for them to export grain and those things. And it was all done unmanned. So, this is the hard transition and adaptation that we're going to have to figure out how to do. I don't think tanks or aircraft carriers are outdated, but we're going to have to figure out the balance of unmanned vehicles, manned vehicles, unmanned ships, manned ships, and we're going to have to figure out who or what does the best. So machines do these things the best, and people do these the best. But those decisions are really hard. But when you were laughing about the carrier, I was thinking about the B-52. How many years has that been flying? And the other problem we have for all that is that the budgets and the cost of these things are really, really high. The F-35 is the most expensive program that anybody has ever had in the Department of Defense, and it's huge. So we got to figure out that balance and that adaptation, and how much we do manned, unmanned, how much we do with computers, and how much we do with people. And it's a very difficult decision to make. So I think it'll be hard for everybody.
I'm glad you mentioned the B-52, because we satisfy the Air Force people too here, right?
Yeah, we have some Air Force people here, yeah.
You answered most of my question just now, but what's your feeling on armored warfare based on what we see on YouTube with the drones and that taking out tanks and so forth? Are we going to have to what do you feel?
Yeah, so I think that we're going to keep all that equipment. We'll be keeping it in different densities when we figure out how to do it. So if you look at the Armenian war, they were actually the first use of drones, so Azerbaijan and Armenia. And now just think about this technology-wise. They couldn't figure out how to fly an airplane to set off or to stimulate the air defense network so that they could go after the air defense, because that's what they wanted to strip away first, was the air defense. Then they wanted to strip away the command and control and that. But anyhow, so they bought 6 old planes that were trainers, and they put 6 people in them with several belts. And they belted, as they took off flying toward Armenia, they belted the steering columns and the steering mechanisms and jumped out of the airplane. And the airplanes went in, stimulated the network, and then they fired the missiles in to destroy the air defense network. So that's low tech and high tech at once. But at any rate, they also used drones autonomously, making decisions. So the good part, you could do that because it was out in the open, relatively speaking. And when you're driving through the open in a drone and you see a huge 40-ton tank, you can say, if you see it, just kill it. But at any rate, they came to the conclusion that they're still going to need tanks. They're still going to need all those equipment. It's just going to be in different densities. But just like that's happening in Ukraine, when you strip away all that stuff, it's still a close fight. So that's the tough part. But we'll change, but numbers, I think they'll all be there because the people in Azerbaijan, so they were happy to be in a tank when they were closing up tight. So yeah.
Couple of quick questions on Ukraine. Trump has said that with one phone call he can end the war. Does that mean that basically he'd give Putin what he wants and that means the end of the existence of Ukraine? That's one. Two, you mentioned cyber attacks from Russia on our elections. Can you be more specific about what it is they're doing to disrupt? And the third, on Israel, do you feel that the way Israel is fighting the war is creating more terrorists?
You don't get 4, okay?
I'm done.
No. You may have to reiterate those, so stay here. You got those, Ron?
I got them.
Okay,
Let's
good.
see. I think I do, but I'm only going to remember one of them. So, I don't know what the answer. I don't know what the former president's plan is, but the good part is he's talked to President Zelensky, so they've had a conversation. But I think the biggest, well, it'll be interesting what happens. I don't know what will happen if that occurs, if he gets elected and tries to make peace quickly and stuff, depending on what the offer is. Just think about this. Now, this is strange things how the world happens and stuff, but if he makes a peace overture, makes some agreement, and Putin doesn't like it, what happens then? What's that?
Trump looks bad.
Well, we'll see. It could require something different. So I don't know those kind of things, and I couldn't, guess, but I know it could go good or bad for a whole host of people. And I'm not sure what the right answer to begin with is anyhow.
What about the cyber attacks from Russia on the elections?
Oh, yeah. So they used all kinds of bots, we call them, to send in all kinds of information and propaganda. They tried it in the next election also, and we did a much better job handling it. But they have a huge organization, and they're basically hackers and psyops and propagandists that just keep pumping stuff in all the time.
What kind of stuff?
Good and bad. They try to, as an example, they try to divide us further based on current events. Okay, so they take that and amplify that. Okay, and we are, we're a nation that we react more to individual incidents than we do trends. And anger is a more powerful stimulant than happiness. So they play on all those things all the time. They're not the only ones. This is a constant thing that's going on in the information space. Okay? And number 3?
Israel's, the way they're fighting the war, is it creating more terrorists?
I think that, how the international community wins the peace, I'll call it that way. At the end, that will determine more of it than what they've done to date. So, of course, everybody's dream is that, Gaza gets an organization that can run it effectively. They get everything rebuilt, and at some point in the future, a Palestinian state gets out there. So if all those things occur over a long time, because it can't happen quickly, I think that will determine more than just how they fought the war.
I'm going to limit mine to 2 questions. First question, you said much about threats and conflicts. Can you speak to our overall readiness in the military in the U.S.?
Yeah, the readiness in the military. A couple things. We have some of the most ready organizations in the military, but if we had our way, we'd have more of them ready than are. Okay, so in the last 2 years, as you know, we've had a heck of a time with recruiting. So we're down more people than we would ever feel comfortable doing. I mean, the size of the Army is very small right now. And, small as it's been since before World War II. So, and then the problem, the challenge is that readiness costs a lot of money, and with the challenges with the trying to modernize and continue, it's a huge resource challenge, balancing readiness with modernization, and then the people part of it is we have a saying, and it's true every year. We get less for more because everything is more expensive, so we get less airplanes, we get less tanks, we get less ammunition and everything because it's more expensive. So that's really the toughest thing. So our forces that are ready are very good, and they're ready for what they got to face, but there's not as many of them ready as we would like because we just can't afford to do it. Okay.
Yeah, just to follow up to that, number one, so that was my concern. If we're supplying, Ukraine and Israel with weapons, how are we replenishing our own systems? But
we're working on that industrial base and improving that and putting more investments in that. But again, that's more money taken away from modernization and future readiness. But yeah.
So the second question is...
that was the second question.
No, that was a follow-up to the first.
Yeah, it was a follow-up. Okay.
So this is number two. Number two is, we hear a lot about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Can you speak to the truth behind really what happened?
The truth behind what happened. We left.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Good thing he's retired, I can tell you that.
No, we left. We left abruptly. We pulled the people out. We pulled until the backbone of what kept the Afghan army fighting was really pulled out almost 8-10 months before we pulled the people out quickly. So, and we didn't do a good job of building the institutions that required. So, pay, logistically equipment, feeding all the people they weren't able to do that. So that started the problem as we pulled our people back in, because we pulled people in from the far reaches first, and then we pulled all of them out a couple months, before, and there was plenty of recommendations and plenty of military advice about what was going to happen, how, and how fast it was going to go, and that was the decision that was made. So I'm not sure I could add too much to that.
Step up.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. He holds it. That last question tied into this, talking about money and all that. Although global warming and all that is a big deal in the green, et cetera, are we being naively distracted? And how much money is going toward that? And would you propose that we should be keeping more money for preparing ourselves for all these other things? And along with that question, are the other countries really into caring about global warming as much as we're talking? Because one world war is going to undo all this, what we're trying to do for eons.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
Wow, I don't know too much about that. But just for the resources writ large, we have a challenge with
Last question.
discretionary funding. Okay, the majority of our budget each year goes to non-discretionary things. It's over 70%. So there's not a whole lot of discretionary spending that can be adjusted. So that's really, in the long term, we just have to watch how all that's working, because I think it was somewhere around 1960, it was just the opposite. So 30% was non-discretionary, and 70% was discretionary. So you had more resources to do all the things you're talking about. Now it's just the opposite of that. It's 30% that's discretionary, and that's spread around. That's including all of the Department of Defense and everything else. So, and we're going to have to somehow figure out. Again, this is a little bit outside my expertise, but we're going to have to figure out how to do healthcare, because every year we spend more money, significantly more money in the military on healthcare. You know, and it just keeps growing. That's why I said we get less for more every year. You know, so but it's a great question. It's a huge strategic issue for the entire country, and the balance of how you do that. One, it's going to be a tough decision, and two, I'm not sure that we have a great way ahead as we look forward, because the things are going to get more expensive, and we're going to have less money to be flexible with.
Now, as a graduate of West Point, are you comfortable with the quality of the graduates coming out of the academies for battle hardness and command responsibilities?
Wow. Everybody tells me they are. So, but your question is a good one and everything, because you know you hear all the answers, and you hear all this stuff in the news, and you hear all this and everything. My question is the same, which was, and I'll tell you what I asked people when I was on active duty. I said, well, how are the lieutenants? They doing all right? And they're going, oh yeah, they're really good. I go, then that's not a problem, you know. So for the most part, I think that they're doing very, very well. My son was just stationed there for 3 years, and since I'm such an old man, I'm about 50 years from the day I graduated. We have a 50-year affiliation class. So I got to walk back with them from their summer training and everything, and they're young men and women just like we were when I went through there, and they're very dedicated and committed, and I think that they'll be just as good. They'll actually be better than we are, because we have better training methods. They're smarter than we were, and I think they're better overall. Okay? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, General Rodrigues.
Thank you all. Thank you.